Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Tonight on All In the wake of the Zimmerman verdict, the movement against stand your ground laws is gaining momentum, which means, of course, the right wing and the NRA are doubling down on it. Reverend Al Sharpton will be my guest coming up. Also, the resurrection of the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court may have left it for dead, but that has spawned a real effort in Congress to save it. Senator Amy Klobuchar will be here to give us the latest. Plus, Senator Mike Enzi of Wyoming thought he was friends with the Cheney family, but then again, so did that guy who got shot in the face. Liz Cheney for Senate. This is going to be good. But we begin tonight, 4 days since a jury declared George Zimmerman not guilty, with an American right wing working overtime to create a counter narrative about black racism, white victimhood, and persecution. You see, in the bizarro world of conservative commentary, a dead black teenager and a shooter who's been found not guilty is a parable for, quote, reverse racism towards white people, and yet another example to justify fear of the black other. Leading the charge is the right-wing group perhaps most invested in making sure there are millions of people like George Zimmerman walking around fearful and armed. The National Rifle Association. Fresh off their victory of a concealed carry law in the latest holdout state, in Illinois, the NRA is attacking Attorney General Eric Holder for these comments he made yesterday at the NAACP convention.
It is our collective obligation. We must stand our ground to ensure that our laws reduce violence and take a hard look at laws that contribute to more violence than they prevent.
Today, the NRA fired back, saying, quote, the Attorney General fails to understand that self-defense is not a concept, it's a fundamental human right. To send a message that legitimate self-defense is to blame is unconscionable and demonstrates once again that this administration will exploit tragedies to push their political agenda. Joining me now to discuss the growing movement against Stand Your Ground is my colleague, Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, founder and president of the National Action Network. He delivered a speech on the law at the NAACP conference in Orlando today.
We cannot have our sons and daughters' lives on the line for anybody that wants to pursue them, follow them, and kill them and say it's in self-defense. Outsiders named Alec brought Stand Your Ground in. So outsiders like Al are going to help bring Stand Your Ground out.
Reverend, this is what I hear from conservatives. They say, you liberals don't understand. You're so foolish. Stand Your Ground had nothing to do with this case. The Zimmerman defense didn't use Stand Your Ground. Why are you so upset about Stand Your Ground? That's not to blame for the verdict. What do you say?
They should listen to the interview that the one juror has done, who cited all the way through the interview Stand Your Ground, said that it was considered in the deliberations in the jury room, as well as the fact Stand Your Ground changed the self-defense instructions of the judge. Stand Your Ground was the basis that George Zimmerman was not arrested. Zimmerman was not arrested the night he shot Trayvon Martin. So you can't take Stand Your Ground out when it was the premise of his not being arrested. It was the basis that the instructions were changed now on how you instruct a jury on self-defense in the state of Florida. And to prove it, the juror said, Stand Your Ground, we couldn't go against when we were deliberating. You can't have better evidence than that.
Today, there was a group of people called the Dream Defenders who've been occupying the Capitol in Florida. Yeah, really impressive. And they've been calling for a meeting with Rick Scott. Rick Scott issued a statement about his feeling about Stand Your Ground. He says that they put together a state task force, and he says this task force listened to Floridians across the state, heard their viewpoints and expert opinions on this law. The task force recommended the law should not be overturned, and Governor Scott agrees. What's your reaction?
I mean, it was appointed by him, but I think that the legislators in Florida, National Action Network is having a 3-day conference next week to deal with how we organize, and we're doing 100 cities around the country dealing with Stand Your Ground and federal involvement this Saturday. And the clear case now is we have an example with this trial of the dangers of Stand Your Ground. What was interesting to me, Chris, is this juror, again, stated that Trayvon Martin, even after, and I'm quoting her, he was confronted by George Zimmerman, he should have gone home. Well, if you really believe in self-defense and Stand Your Ground, if you admit that George Zimmerman confronted him, then why couldn't Trayvon Martin use Stand Your Ground? and not retreat? Why did he have to go home? Why didn't he have the right to self-defense? So it's even selective how it's applied. You've been doing a fantastic job on the Marissa Alexander case. Stand your ground doesn't apply to her. So not only is it bad law, it is not even equally applied because it's at the discretion of the judge.
And so why do you understand this lack of equal application? Because I think that this gets to the core of it. You and I understand stand your ground not as a neutral law brought to the citizens because of some philosophical adherence to some vision of self-defense, right? There is an agenda there that is connected to a broader agenda about making people fearful and making people fearful of specific other people.
And if you personify danger, threat with color, age, dress, and you personify what is solid and safe and law-abiding with other than that, then clearly those that are white and perceived a certain way have the right to stand your ground. Those that are not are the ones we're standing our ground against, even if they're the ones being approached, as in the case of Trayvon Martin. Even this juror statement says.
So then where does this go from here? I know your National Action Network is doing marches this weekend. What are the next steps here? Is it going to state legislatures in the states where these laws have been passed and attacking those laws, going after repeal?
You've got to go after these laws both in the courts and at the voting box. You have to say to these legislators, and don't forget next year is an election year in Florida, the governor on down, that you must mobilize voters to protect themselves. Because what Trayvon Martin's case does is say that anybody now, any nut can say, oh, I was in fear of my life, I could use deadly force. That's a threat to everyone, and we must avoid that happening again.
Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, great pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Craig.
Now, outside the narrow focus of the NRA, the broader world of right-wing media has been obsessed with the supposed hypocrisy of people who are outraged about the verdict, because those people apparently don't get outraged enough about black-on-black crime.
Black thugs are killing black people. So if you want to talk about contempt that people have for black men, you know, the most contempt that people have for black men are other black men.
The horrendous black-on-black murder rate is virtually ignored by the press. Best to blame the white power structure and look the other way.
What about black-on-black crime? How about the kids that are being killed in our inner cities? Where is everybody? Why don't you get your civil rights people with the black-on-black? What about the black-on-black crime?
Sorry, couldn't help but laugh at that. Jamel Bowie, in a fantastic response to this oft-repeated myth, points out the quote, there is no such thing as black-on-black crime. Yes, from 1976 to 2005, 94% of black victims were killed by black offenders. But that racial exclusivity was also true for white victims of violent crime. 86% were killed by white offenders. For the large majority of crimes, you'll find that victims and offenders share a racial identity. Now, when the right media is not callously and cynically using the tragic deaths of young black shooting victims in major urban centers to score points in some weird racial grievance contest, they're devoting their, albeit small, capacity for empathy to George Zimmerman himself, who's become a kind of martyr figure. Today, the Daily Caller sent a 16-year-old intern to troll Jay Carney about federal protection for Zimmerman and his family.
Because of the death threats being received by George Zimmerman and his parents, is the president going to take any action for their security, or are they on their own?
The president has called for, echoing the statements of Trayvon Martin's family, for calm reflection in the wake of the verdict.
So they're on their own?
You can editorialize all you want, and I have no doubt that you will, but that is a ridiculous statement.
Joining me now is MSNBC contributor Joy Reid, who's also managing editor of thegrio.com, and Eric Boehlert, a senior fellow at Media Matters for America. We'll talk about the Daily Caller trolling, but the black-on-black crime thing, there is something about the invocation, the phrase, that just really grates. It's cringe-inducing, and I think what's cringe-inducing is the manifest disingenuous of it. I mean, First of all, liberals and black writers, commentators, journalists, pundits of all stripes are constantly talking about people getting shot in Chicago. We've done segments on it. You have talked. I mean, it's not like no one cares. People are up in arms in Chicago. There's been huge mass mobilization against the mayor in the African-American community specifically about the problem there. So it's just not true. But there's this like very gross underbelly. Am I right? To this like obsession with black-on-black crime?
Yeah, I got to tell you, I'm just touched by the concern for white conservatives for crime crime in the inner city. And I look at all of the Daily Caller pieces about Hydea Pendleton. Oh, wait. Those didn't exist because they don't care about Hydea Pendleton. They don't really care about inner city crime. And the examples of that are two. One, when Illinois tries to pass laws that reduce the number of handguns proliferating on the streets of a city like that, they challenge them and says you can't have those laws. And number two, if you care so much about gang shootings and inner city crime, well then you shouldn't like Stand Your Ground. Because the other dirty little secret of the Stand Your Ground laws is that they are quite successfully used by gang members who get into gang shootouts with other gang members and then say, well, you know, I wasn't fair for my life. That other guy isn't a gang. Right. And that actually has happened in Florida. So if you really care so much about us, black folks, then you really want to oppose Stand Your Ground.
And then part of it also, Eric, clearly is associating blackness with criminality, which has been the really disgusting dark underbelly of this entire conversation from the beginning and was part of the bizarre and awful character assassination of Trayvon Martin, who still lies in a grave at this very moment.
Well, it's not just black association with crime. It's Chicago, Obama, black crime. That is the 5-year story they've been trying to tell. And as Joy pointed out, you know, when people try to talk about getting guns off the streets of Chicago, who's the first to complain? Who's the first to raise, you know, a ruckus? It's the right-wing media, it's the NRA. But the denigration of Trayvon Martin has been amazing, and it continues this week. You know, it was an ugly attempt in 2012 to sort of shift the blame, shift the focus away from George Zimmerman. This is a kid who deserved what he got. Let's face it. You know, passing around phony pictures of him on the internet. You know, posting his old tweets and presenting him as a thug and things like that. So that was resurrected this week after the trial. Geraldo Rivera saying, you know, he wore a hoodie. He looks like a thug. You're going to get. Ted Nugent, you know, practically dancing on this poor kid about how he was.
Dog that put down. Nobody they're still doing it to this saying that he was a thug, a black thug who deserved to die.
Yeah, and let's talk about, you know, in terms of the conversation on the right has gone. I mean, Rush Limbaugh hit a new low this week saying that the trial was justification for him to use the N-word.
Correct.
I mean, if there's any person in America who should never use that word.
Chicago.
But a huge part of this too is just like it's just running. It's this very cynical way of essentially trying to tickle these certain fear neurons in the base core audience, which is like, you need us because they're out to get you, and they're coming. And it's, to me, there's an absolute connection between that psychology, which is that you're embattled, you're inside, as I said this before, you're inside the plantation house and Nat Turner's at the door, which is like, that's the deep fear that you're getting at, right? There's a connection with that and Stand Your Ground laws and the NRA and all the stockpiling of weapons and all of the entire paranoid, delusional architecture of a world they've constructed for themselves, which is based on this imminent race violence, race war, that the scary blacks are going to get you. And that, to me, is such a disgusting and irresponsible instinct in American citizens to cultivate as a matter of essentially selling your product.
And they even did it with the protests, assuming, oh, well, these blacks are going to riot. I mean, this constant hatred and fear of African Americans that runs through the far right, it's a problem that they're still dealing with.
And I genuinely think the vast majority of Americans are so much better than that. I really do. MSNBC contributor Joy Reid, Eric Boehlert from Media Matters. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Coming up, if you like the NYPD stop and frisk policy, you're going to love the guy being floated as the next head of the Department of Homeland Security.